I'm happy to be here today. I thank you for asking me to be here. There's a lot of problems that we're working on. There's a lot of folks in the room working on these problems. They're complex, but I hold out some hope that we've got some planning processes that are going on right now that are going to really help us improve the situation on the landscape. So we're talking, we were asked to look back, look forward, and so I'm going to talk about lake fisheries in the North Saskatchewan Basin. This is a photograph taken of a lake sturgeon in the river that flows by us right there. It was taken just upstream by Owen Watkins, but one of our success, well, this fish is coming back, which is really good to see. So I'm going to give a quick overview about the Alberta situation. Talk about fisheries of Alberta's past, when there was few people and plenty of fish. And just a warning, you don't want to Google that, because there's a social network site and there's something to do about hookups, but nothing to do about fishing. And then talk about the more recent past with the fisheries collapses that we've had. Talk about fisheries of Alberta's present. We've got lots of people here now in the province. We've got pretty restrictive regulations. We have some good news stories, but we also are seeing a loss of lakes due to water quality. And then want to talk about fisheries of Alberta yet to come. It's projected we're going to get a lot more people here, and what's that going to do to fish and water quality and our aquatic resources. So as far as the fish that we tend to study, like walleye, we're quite far north in their range. Walleye will live, this is the range in North America, and like most other organisms, the further north you go, the slower they grow, the later they mature. And so this affects their production. And here in Alberta we have abundant resources, and that brings a lot of people to the province. I just love this photograph. It was taken from a plane over Pigeon Lake. And so this was a fishing tournament, and these are people fishing on a grid that the tournament organizers put out. And these are the vehicles parked on the shore of the lake. And so pretty neat photograph to show our lakes do get fishing pressure. We've seen huge increases in the number of people in the province. In 1950 there was less than 1 million, now we're over 4 million people. That's a quadrupling of people. So the other really interesting thing, and I like these next 3 slides because it shows relative angler pressure. And Alberta has very few lakes compared to other jurisdictions. We've got 800 roughly fish-bearing lakes. And the other day I was driving down to Calgary, and I drove from Edmonton to Calgary, and I didn't pass a single fish-bearing lake. And I think you could probably drive right out of the province into the States and not pass a fish-bearing lake. But I have to think about that one. But 2 summers ago, my family and I, we drove through Ontario on the Trans-Canada, and you really have to pay attention because you're driving around lakes all the time. Like, we have very few lakes here, and that's very important to understand some of the challenges we face here. We do have fairly good numbers of anglers. I need to update the slide with more recent numbers, but what's really important is when you look at the number of anglers per lake, then it's really striking the difference between Alberta and some of the other jurisdictions. And comparisons between us and them, as far as fishing regulations, are difficult to make because we're so different. So, fisheries of Alberta's past. We know that there was native use of fish before European settlers came, but actually our lakes have been fished for quite a long time. We tend to have a personal reference from, well, when I was younger, this is what it was like. But these lakes have been fished for a long time. Lac Ste mission was established in 1842, and they were fishing back then. There's Hudson Bay records on the fish caught. Wabamun used to be called White Whale Lake, and the mission was established in 1899. These references are from the book Hills of Hope. And in 1899, it was described there was plenty of fish at that time. During the Depression at Wabamun, I'll read this. During those winters, Mr. Gardner sold over 5,000 commercial fishing licenses at $5 a license during the Depression. lots and lots of licenses, and these are nets. And during the Depression, people were spending a lot of money to fish. Here's another quote. The ice was covered with sleighs, cabooses, trucks, and cars until it became difficult to find a parking space. Yeah. Pretty huge pressure a long time ago. This is a neat graph of commercial fishing. It goes from 1918 to 2002 in Lake Wabamun. And so we suspect very early on that fishing pressure eliminated the predatory species like northern pike and walleye, or at least really dropped their abundances, so that the whitefish numbers, and this is kilograms of whitefish, that's 500,000 kilograms there, and this is the years across there to 2002. And so once the predators were out of the system, we've seen this in other ecosystems, that the abundance of prey species will start to cycle wildly, and so we would have huge boomer years of commercial fish catches and then none at all. So lots of fishing occurred by nets. And then a creel survey in the 1980s, there was 80,000 anglers on that lake over the winter is what the estimate was. Lots of fishing pressure on relatively small lakes if you compare them to some of the other lakes. Here's a graphic of what the number of nets that would go into Lac Ste in the commercial fishery. And so you look at, when you're out there on the ice talking to the commercial fishermen, most of the nets are under the ice fishing, so you don't really get a visual of what it looks like, but you can imagine the fishing pressure that many nets would create within the lake. So it's very clear that our lakes, the supply can't meet the demand, and Lac Ste, Pigeon, the walleye were gone. Wabamun Lake, the walleye were extirpated, like completely removed, and pike collapsed. So Fisheries of Alberta is present. How have things changed? Well, we've been using quite a bit of science now to make sure that we really understand the numbers we're getting, and from both the use and the fish assessments. So first of all, we got to find out how much money's in the bank. So we do a fish assessment, and then we need to find out how much money is being spent, and the objective is to balance our budgets. And so once we get those numbers, then we can come up with an appropriate regulation to maintain fish populations. From there, we do consultation with the various stakeholders, and we implement our regulation with an education program to hopefully get people on side, and enforcement for those that aren't on side. And this is a cycle, and we continue through this cycle, and that's how we keep up with the varying use that we see at our lakes, because that changes, and then also the fish populations change through time as well. So just a quick background on how we maintain fish in a lake, Fisheries 101 I call this, but when there's very few fishermen, like back when they first set up the missions on the various lakes, when there was very few fishermen, you don't need regulations because you just can't impact the resource. But as we got more and more people fishing, you need tools like bag limits or size limits to maintain populations. And once you get to lots of anglers, we've had to use catch and release in some circumstances, or tag systems. So we can allocate, say, 3,000 tags for Lac Ste, because we know that can be sustainably harvested. And the nice thing about tags is we don't see the influx of anglers. We've seen the number of people fishing go up 5 times if we change a regulation. So we find the tags have really helped with this allocating fish without overwhelming the resource. And as you go down this use of tools for regulating harvest, the next tool in the toolbox is limited entry, which we haven't used in Alberta, but they have in other jurisdictions. So it will get to a point where if you want to fish on Pigeon Lake, you need a Pigeon Lake fishing license, and only those with a license will be able to fish the lake, is where we'll get to as numbers increase. Still, allocation is a social problem. It creates a lot of challenges. We go into biology to learn about fish, but really we should learn, a lot of the work is dealing with our stakeholders. So here's an example. We've had 80,000 anglers on Wabamun Lake. We've just introduced walleye in there. Once the walleye are established, we probably will be able to harvest 4,000. And so that means 76,000 of those 80,000 anglers won't get a fish. So how do we determine that? And the other thing is, as people fish, just through handling and a bit of poaching, we can kill fish as well. So it's that's the complexity of what we do. But presently, we've had some big successes. This is Wabamun Lake. I took a screen capture from Get Hooked on Fishing. Thank you, Mr. Wall. Yes, and so right now in Wabamun Lake, you can catch a trophy-sized northern pike, which is pretty unheard of, close to 1 million people. Really neat. And so, you know, part of it's been the catch and release regulation. Part of it's been the train spill. I mean, that kept people from fishing the lakes. But these lakes can produce large fish, and when you see large fish like this is a real indication that things are in good shape. We've had other successes at Pigeon, where the walleyes were pretty well extirpated. They were reintroduced, and now we have sustainable harvest. It's a very popular fishery. However, northern pike they're coming back, but they're still collapsed, as well as yellow perch. Lac Ste. When I started, the fellow I took over from said, "I got to apologize. I think we wiped out the walleye at Lac Ste. There was a survey of anglers in '97, and they talked to thousands of people. No one had caught a walleye. But since then, walleye are back, and we have sustainable harvest there. Northern pike are recovering. However, yellow perch are still collapsed. So fisheries yet to come. What do we see coming? So I was lucky enough recently to be able to go back to school, and on my committee was Dr. David Schindler, and in our world, he really is a rock star. I've heard stories that the king and queen of Norway invited him for a boat tour to go down the coast of Norway to look at facilities for him to evaluate them. So, like, the guy's a rock star. And so during my defense of my thesis, I looked at size selective harvest of fish. And he asked me, so what do you see as the biggest threat to fish in Alberta in the next 50 years? And so I said water quality, and that was what he was looking for.